In diplomacy and realpolitik, when you play a game of smoke and mirrors, it usually means that there is one narrative and imagery for public consumption, and then there is the real, hard, unalloyed truth, which is a completely different picture. Something like this is happening currently. The fictional images that the United States withdrew from Afghanistan under humiliating circumstances. It lost out. And if the venerable magazine, The Economist, is to be believed, so did India. However, a careful analysis of the events of the past few days reveals that something entirely different is going on in Afghanistan. I will expand on the moves being made on ground zero in the AFPAC regions, moves that will, according to me, benefit both India and the United States immensely. Hi and welcome all to the CAA Show. My name is Juggi Bhasin. CAA is, of course, conversations and analysis. There were two significant developments in the past weeks which caught my eye. The first was the visit of the Russian Secretary of the Security Council, General Nikolai Patrushev, to India, followed by the visit of the CIA chief, William Burns. Both visits occurred in a gap of less than a day. What was the purpose of these two powerful men making a beeline to Delhi? The CIA chief's India stopover came on the heels of hectic confabulations between the US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and our Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar. As a matter of fact, I cannot recall this kind of intense interaction between any US Secretary of State and an Indian Foreign Minister in the recent past. Something was going on. Then consider another enigma which has not been resolved till now. Even if the Taliban advance took the Americans by surprise, how could the United States, in their right mind, leave behind billions of dollars worth cache of arms and ammunition? And then I spoke with many experts and began to join the dots, and the penny dropped. It appears that the Americans have unleashed an audacious game plan in the region, and by all accounts, it does look like that the Indians are on board. I will explain the game plan in a minute, but first understand why the Americans were compelled to try something completely different. In the 20-odd years that the Americans battled with the Taliban, they understood why it was an unwinnable war. It was an unwinnable proposition, not because Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires as it is popularly believed. It was quite simply that the Pakistanis continually streamed arms and ammunition to the Taliban and trained them to make a bid for Kabul. The Americans could not be persuaded otherwise because they saw Afghanistan as their own backyard where they felt that they had every right to interfere and call the shots. The Americans could not make any headway with them because the Pakistanis would always use the nuclear weapons blackmail card to get their way and coerce policy making. India, despite a significant presence in Afghanistan for almost 20 years, was also uneasy because we knew the Pakistanis were trying to take over Afghanistan by proxy so that the country would be used as a staging post to mount attacks on India and open a new front. So really, both the Americans and the Indians had their backs to the wall. And with the entry of China as a disruptor and a friend of the Taliban, and Russians making accommodating noises, the scenario was not too good for both the United States and India. But all that is fast changing by some deft moves made by the United States and supported by India. If the Americans know something well, then it is the character of the Taliban and their sponsors, the Pakistanis. After all, the Americans have fought the Taliban for 20 years. The Taliban are largely rural illiterates steeped in orthodoxy. They know how to fight and kill, but they don't know how to govern. Sources tell me that the Americans give Taliban not even 3 months before they come apart, and complete chaos, violence along with acute food shortages descends over Afghanistan. Both the Americans and the worried Pakistanis know this. The Pakistanis, in fact, sent their ISI chief to Kabul, not so much to grin and present a triumphant picture to the world, but to convey their worry to the Taliban and to ask them to rein in the TTP, or the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, from carrying out further attacks in Pakistan. Sources also say that the Taliban gave no such assurances to the Pakistanis. And how could they? As the Americans had already foreseen, worldwide jihadi groups and fighters are making tracks to Afghanistan, the new caliphate of terror. The Taliban cannot and have no intention of stopping these groups from doing what they do best. And that is where the American plan of leaving the huge cache of weapons comes into play. The Taliban and jihadi fighters from all over the world will use these weapons in Pakistan, in China and Russia, and even in some Central Asian republics. The Taliban leadership might pretend and say that they will not interfere in the issue of Uyghur Muslims of China. But the ground zero Taliban fighter and the international jihadi will not hold back and will launch attacks both in China and Russia to avenge the cause of Uyghurs and Chechen Muslims respectively. Kashmir is way down on the priority list because China and Russia and of course Pakistan are in close proximity. All the American hardware left behind will be used in these places. The Americans, by the way, did something similar way back in the 80s, when through their Pakistani proxies, they armed the Afghan Mujahideen to bring down Soviet Union aircraft and helicopters with Stinger missiles. That scenario could be replayed again with primarily China and Russia as targets. And at the other end, the TTP will continue their onslaught in Pakistan. Just for all of you to know, the TTP attacks, by the way, have almost doubled currently as compared to the past. So the Americans will use one stone to kill many birds. The Americans in this manner will bring unbearable pressure on Pakistan and make them do their bidding. They will also not mind things become really tough for the Chinese and the Russians. They would be thinking, we faced chin music in Afghanistan, now it is the turn of the Chinese and the Russians. India, on its part, will not mind these developments. China poses a problem for both the Americans and India. So there is a convergence of interest here. And we would only be so happy to see Pakistan come under pressure. The CAA chief was probably in Delhi to cement this deal. The Russian general was here because they are worried about what could be headed their way. They want to tie up with India for a common front. Already, there are signs that the Russians and even the Iranians are distancing themselves from the Taliban government. They fully know the nature of the beast. And as for the Taliban, anyone who thinks that they will listen to the Pakistanis, they live in a parallel world. Their raison d'etre, or their reason for existence, is simply violence and more of it. If they lose or they are driven out, then armed with their assault weapons and wearing their sandals, they will head to the hills or the rural belt. They would not mind that. They have nothing to lose. India, of course, could end up having the last laugh in this scenario. Unlike the ISI chief, who so openly and foolishly exposed himself to the world by smiling for cameras, the Indians, who are masters of quiet diplomacy, will support the Americans and watch their enemies in the region self-destruct. And that would be hubris, of course, for our two principal enemies in the region. So that's all for this particular episode, and I hope you have enjoyed this episode. And if you do like the CAA show, please press on the subscriber button. And on that note, it's good night and cheers from my end.